This is important stuff
for you to know.
Welcome to the show. This is Tony.
And this is Javier.
This is the show where we talk about what we believe may be important stuff.
But in the end, it's for you to decide.
Welcome back, everybody. Javier, today I would like to talk about some effects on world population, the movement of populations, world population migration. Migration, why populations relocate, move into different countries, and maybe we can discuss some of the effects of population migration worldwide. What are your thoughts? Migration.
Well, first of all, I like the topic that you have picked for today, because normally we hear people talking about immigration and the effect that it has on the job market and in the community.
Mm-hmm.
We see that happening a lot in Europe and here in the U.S. But you have brought in a new perspective to look at the other side of the coin, why people migrate. Now, migration has been has taken place all throughout history for many, many reasons. Climate, wars, persecution, genocide. Those are what is called push migration, because you have push and pull migration, and actually it's a third one that I think people don't talk about, but it's forced.
Good point. Good point.
Because you have, for example, the ones that I mentioned are pushed.
Yeah, let's talk about pushed migration. That's a good one.
You're pushed, for example, like I said, by war. So if we look at what happened at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century,
Mm-hmm.
with the League of Nations, Germany and the Ottoman Empire, that is the war.
Yeah.
So all the territories were divided among the victors, the allies at the time. They were just taken away from their control and given to somebody else. We saw that, for example, it happened with Syria. It happened with in the Middle East, and with Palestine.
Yes,
Palestine.
Syria is a good example.
Right.
It's very current. More than 200,000 native Syrians have migrated outside of their borders.
It happened also in Africa. For example, New Guinea, that belonged to the Germans, was assigned to the UK and Australia. So I think also with Tanzania.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what an example of pushed migration. Push migration
and pooled migration. Why don't you define pooled migration? That's a good point.
It's an economic and social perspective of migration. For example, if you have two neighboring countries like the U.S. and Mexico,
mm-hmm.
where you have a country that has let's say in one case a demand for labor.
Okay.
If you look at the western states, for example, California, they need people to tend the fields, for the orange and whatever
crops.
So,
Mm-hmm.
So they need labor. So they're actually pulling people from the border country, Mexico, and inviting workers to come. So they're actually pulling them, quote unquote.
Yes.
They're bringing them in with opportunities to work and benefit and go back again in the off season. Obviously, a lot of them stay. That's one of them. Another one, for example, it's more general. A better economic condition,
mm-hmm.
better opportunities. That's another pool. That's another pool migration. They're pulling people. They're attracting people because of better conditions in the neighboring country.
Well, I know, using that same example, the pooled migration,
mm-hmm.
just to follow your point, the same thing has happened in recent times in the Persian Gulf. Some of the very developed or quickly developing nations in the Persian Gulf have pooled populations into their country where the majority of their population, certainly their labor force, is foreign. People came for jobs,
mm-hmm.
right to it. Also, pooled migration can be within a country, intra-state, within the country. China might be an example.
Well, yeah, of course. Yeah, China is probably these days it has the highest people migrating internally. I'm not talking about people going from China to, for example, Canada or the U.S. or some other places. Inside, so it's local migration. People, in the case of China, because of the economic growth of the country, the second economy in the world today, after the U.S., people from the rural communities are now flooding the bigger cities, and that also creates a problem. And I think it creates two problems. One, for the city that is receiving these migrants, because there is a pressure on social services, and the utilities and traffic, pollution, and you name it. And that's an example of something that happens worldwide. Major cities in the world grow faster due to migration or immigration than to normal birth rates. You have that happening we see that happening in New York City.
Yes.
When it grew because of immigration.
Mm-hmm.
We saw that in Los Angeles,
Mm-hmm.
California, London, because of the colonies. So that happens locally as well as across borders,
Mm-hmm.
migration. Another one, we talk about push and pull, and
Yes.
I can give you more examples, but another one, what I call
the third one, that's a good one.
What I call forced migration. When you divide it, for example, we mentioned the case of the League of Nations, and also after the Second World War with the United Nations, that they divided countries. They divided Germany.
Mm-hmm.
Some people were forced west, and some people stayed east.
Yes.
We happened in Poland with the Poles. It has happened. It happened, for example, it has happened in Africa.
Yes.
With the it was I forgot the name. It was a movement that started at the end of the 19th century to divide the African territory among the nations.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and it just drew the maps. And I met when I was doing a fellowship at a New England university. I met a doctor from Rwanda, and she was telling me what happened with Rwanda and Burundi. They put the map of Africa, I guess, in a table, and all these leaders from the first world, quote unquote, they took a pencil and said, okay, let's divide this like this. And actually, they took tribes, and they split tribes in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
They split families in the middle. Okay, or they took families away from their fields because the line was between them and the fields, and they lost, the way of living.
Mm-hmm.
So they were forced to migrate, and then that's why we have so many civil wars in Africa, for example.
Following along forced migration, tell me if you agree or disagree with this, that situations like political unrest or social disruption, drug cartels, a government that is politically aggressive towards its people. Do those examples fall under the forced migration? Examples that I wanted to use, Venezuela, because of these circumstances.
That would be what I consider push migration is local events, circumstances, force people to leave, to migrate. For example, you gave an example. Political unrest or political situation. We have seen that happening here that is affecting the U.S., and that's why it's such an issue these days, immigration.
Yes.
We look at what happened in Cuba after the Cuban Revolution.
Uh-huh.
How many Cubans came to Miami?
Uh-huh.
I mean, we're talking about thousands, hundreds of thousands of Cubans came here.
Pushed
that was
or
pushed.
Forced?
That was pushed.
It seems like a fine line there, pushed or forced.
I think the difference is that when it's pushed, it's local circumstances that force people to migrate.
Okay, that cause people to migrate.
They cause people to migrate. For me, forced is, like I said, League of Nations, United Nations, where they just draw a line and say, you go this way and you go that way.
Okay.
Without any evident or major circumstance.
Okay.
They just say you move. Next day they say, okay, you know what? Now you belong to another country.
Okay.
So that's pushed.
There are a couple of examples, and what I'd like to pick up next, we're going to pause right here for a quick break. And what I'd like to pick up is the effects of these three types, or migration in general, on populations within nations. What are the effects, economic, socially, within nations? We'll be right back after a short break. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Javier, let's pick it up where we left off. Migration. Let's talk about the effects of migration on a country's immigration program. What are some of the positives? What are some of the negatives? And then maybe we can look at some of the internal pressures and challenges that are applied. For what reason? So, what are some of the effects of migration on a country's immigration system? Any examples come to mind?
Well, yeah, one, it's evident for us who live here in South Florida because of the immigration into the U.S. of Cubans running away from the Cuban Revolution. They have become a very productive force in South Florida.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going down Miami, or anywhere between that corridor between Fort Lauderdale and Miami,
Yeah.
and you see the influence that the Cubans have had on the local economy, it has been very significant, which that's an economic advantage. However, and this is a very personal opinion of mine, there is also a positive impact in the culture. We live in the era of globalization.
Mm-hmm.
I think cultural isolation is negative, and in some cases it may be dangerous.
Culture isolation.
Yes.
Define that for
well,
us. So
when let's say a country that wants to keep their culture solid, total, they don't want any influence from other countries. We see that, for example, happening in Japan. In Japan, it's very difficult to get a working permit. It's very difficult. I think it's almost impossible to migrate to Japan.
Mm-hmm.
You can go and work there for a while, and people from certain ethnicities and religions are not allowed in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's dangerous. That it's keeping you away from globalization. You're not getting the benefit of learning about other cultures, of mixing. There's always positives. Of course, there are negatives, but there's always a positive when you have two cultures.
Yes.
Merging.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, whatever comes out of that normally would be a positive.
Okay, but there are some examples that actually follow that same policy to protect their own ethnicity,
Mm-hmm.
but it works for them. Thailand.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot simply go into Thailand and begin to work and become a citizen of Thailand, but you can work towards owning a business, owning a building or a property. I don't believe you can own the land.
No, you cannot. In Thailand, you cannot own by yourself. You cannot own anything. You can buy a house, quote unquote, but it is not yours. You're buying use of the house.
Okay.
You can buy. If you could buy a property, you could buy a company. You could buy a business.
Okay.
As long as you have a Thai partner.
Okay. So there is a way that it works. It blends.
Now, it is easy to get a work permit. It's easier than in many other countries. Like it's a lot easier than in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think you have to pay like $1,000 a year, and you get a work permit if they consider that your labor or whatever you're bringing into the country they need. Okay.
Okay.
But it's very easy to prove that. Now, to get, for example, there is no naturalization. You cannot be a naturalized Thai. Even if you're born in Thailand, but your parents are not Thai. Let's say.
Okay.
Let's say
I understand that.
You follow that.
Yeah.
So there's no way you have
it's
to
not
have
a birthright country.
You have to have Thai blood.
Okay. Got it.
To become a citizen of Thailand. Now, is that bad or good? Well, they're protecting their culture, their traditions, their language. Is there a downside? I don't know if people that wanted to migrate, people that can provide, for example, capital,
yes,
would choose to go to Thailand if they know that they will not be considered as citizens, and they would rather go to another place where, in theory, you have a more stable future because you could become a citizen. You could go to Canada and buy your citizenship.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
even in the U.S., I mean, you can come with a good, with an investor's visa, and after a certain investment,
Yeah.
and a certain time, you can opt for a green
But,
card. You can opt for a citizenship.
The citizenship issue, as it affects migration, really is a fluid. It's become more of a fluid plan. The example of Thailand, even if you could not become a naturalized Thai citizen, they still are welcoming in the sense of using migration. They're controlling their immigration so that it benefits the state and their people. So they are in charge of their own immigration policy. Now, the citizenship situation has become so much more fluid because at one point you could not go around and hold multiple citizenships or passports in multiple countries. Now it seems that I think you're allowed up to 3 or 4 different
in the
passports.
U.S. now, the U.S. Would not allow you to hold 2 citizenships. Years ago, I remember.
Yes,
I remember in the '60s, some people, which is our generation,
Yeah.
some people, Americans who were living abroad, their children, where they became 18, they didn't want to go to the Vietnam War,
Yeah.
and they decided to give up. They decided to adopt, for example, a Venezuelan citizenship.
Uh-huh.
If they did that, they had to give up the American citizenship.
Yes.
Now you can do it in the U.S., and I think there's a limit of 2. You can have U.S. and
I'm
another
not sure.
one, but
I'm
you
not
cannot
sure
have
on
2 plus the U.S. I think. I don't know. Maybe if some immigration lawyer is listening to the show, that he can call
He
in,
can call in.
and maybe we can.
There was one
find
other
out.
example I wanted to give, which is the other side of the coin, of a country not controlling their own immigration. Because this is a problem that migration can cause. If they're not prepared to control and take charge of their own immigration policy, the situation in France. France had open immigration, and migration continued and continued, where it got to a point that their natural population was almost a minority. It's very close now.
Well, not only in France, you have it also. In I think in Holland, in the Netherlands. That's pretty close to that, and also in Northern Europe.
Well, that becomes dangerous.
Scandinavia.
Because then you're looking at extinction of an ethnicity.
Well, that's when it becomes a problem.
Yes.
But it all depends. And when you say dangerous, you were assuming that the culture that it's migrating to that country has deficiencies. It's not as, quote unquote, as good as a local one.
Yeah.
Sometimes some cultures could bring in something that is beneficial to the local culture.
Yeah, they enhance the culture. Yeah.
For example, and I will not mention any countries, but there are countries whose culture and tradition is very focused on the family, in the tight knit family, and the support of family members to other family members. And if they go to a country where that is not the case, where the social, where the culture, the local culture, is actually more loose, where when the children get to become adults, 18, they actually push out the door,
Yes.
And even if they stay, the parents feel uncomfortable.
Yes.
They say, now you're 18, now you're an adult, here's the keys to your car, and hey, you're on your own.
Yes.
So you see that happening, that may fragment that central unit of society, which is the family. And if you have people who come in from that first country that has the family traditions, we have seen that, for example, with Italians,
Yes.
with other cultures that are very tight-knit. And they, after many years, they continue to do that, to be that way, and probably people from other cultures around see, I like that. I see this. I like.
So it has a positive effect.
It has a positive effect. Not everything can be negative as
Right.
some people try to put it. I
Okay.
mean, in the discussion about immigration for example, in the U.S. and in Europe, those are the arguments. They're going to destroy our culture.
Uh-huh.
It may be in some places.
Yes.
It may be from certain cultures, but
Yes.
not all of them.
Well, I want to pick this up again right after the break here. I want to talk about, we started on the effects of migration on immigration programs. I want to get more into the economic and social effects that you were just talking about, a positive family effect on countries with open immigration policies, some of the specific economic and social effects. But we'll pick that up right after the break.
1 second, but
Yes.
let's also talk about the impact in the country that is losing the migrants.
Okay, very good. Very good.
Brain drain, etc.
Yes, we'll pick that up right after the break. Welcome back, everybody. Okay, Javier, I want to pick it up where we left off. We talked about some of the impacts migration has on the immigration of a variety of countries. You gave a very positive one, a social impact on the family. What are some social challenges that are created and economic challenges that are created by this migration of populations into a nation?
Well, one of the immediate effects, I guess, and the ones that are very concerning these days in the U.S. is the load that very large immigration in some part of the country, like in the West, in California, New Mexico, Arizona, and so on, has on, for example, on medical services, the demand for education, social security, and so on. So they are becoming so dependent on federal and state assistance that it's overcrowding the citizens.
Yeah, that's true. Let me throw one point in, though. That's different than Thailand or Japan. That's an uncontrolled immigration situation. The strain on those social services because our immigration program here in the U.S. has really failed to control itself. We have a program, but it really has not been effectively implemented, or many of these people would be contributing into the social network rather than just pulling out because they haven't come through the system in a controlled fashion as the policy calls for. But well, I see your point on the drain.
Right. Well, and then you have another explanation of why you have, and you're talking about, I guess, about illegal immigration.
Yes.
That they're not controlled,
right.
They're not registered. Now, why that happens? Every time that you have controls on any market, and here this could be part of a labor market, somebody is going to benefit. Okay, and you find people who are making a lot of money bringing illegal immigrants from Central America and Mexico into the U.S.
Yes.
Now you have an industry. Number one. Another industry that has developed is an industry to forge documents, to give them driver's licenses and so on. There is another industry, huge industry, to provide them the services so that they can repatriate the money that they're making here in the U.S. To send it back to their families in Mexico and Central America. Some even, let's say, formal financial institutions may be bending the curve to benefit from offering these services.
So these are challenges that are really intervened, and businesses have come up. Challenges to an immigration of the United States in this case. What about some countries? I'm thinking of France. I don't want to penalize France here, but it keeps coming to mind. What about a clash of different religions coming together? Is this a challenge or a strain on the migration?
It is
from the migration.
It is because it is. I think it's obvious that this is happening, and we see the violence that is taking place all around the world. Religions some religions, some, not all of them, have different morals, ethics, even law, the concept of law and justice, the way they treat minorities or women. It's also different. And that can put a stress on local customs and traditions. But actually, that is happening anyhow. Even if you don't have immigrants, you have people going as tourists. I've been in Europe. You go to in Switzerland, and you see, if you have been going to Switzerland, for some time, you can see the difference. Gypsies. Now crime has gone up in Geneva, where there was no crime. So, yes, those are things that are changing. You see, for example, in London now, in England, in London, even the Bishop of Canterbury agrees that in some areas where the dominant population is Muslim, they are being allowed to have the Sharia law, which contradicts, the host country law.
Yes.
And that it's like telling people, okay, people, now the immigrants in the U.S. from other cultures will not be bound by the American
So it's
law.
not just religious philosophy, it's actually a rule of law that is guiding the social. What about some of the economic? Let's talk about some of the economic impacts, because this is affecting the world. There's a tremendous migration, rural to urban, and this challenge is tremendous. We see it in the United States.
Yeah, it's happening. I mean, we see that here. Guess. I think we have the best example this week with Detroit going bankrupt.
No question.
What is going to happen? What is going to happen to the people who have been working with GM, Chrysler, and Ford, who may be losing their jobs because of what is happening? What about the employees?
Yes.
Because it's circular.
And it's been happening over a period of 30 years. A lot of these manufacturing jobs have left that area
already. But now look what is going to happen. The city goes bankrupt. So public employees who work for the city, for the local governments, will probably be out of a job. So now they're not going to buy cars. If they had to buy a car this year, they're going to postpone to see what happens. Or they say, you know what, let's move somewhere else.
Yes.
And you're going to have migration also taking place here.
Yeah, there's no question. And the challenges presented to these urban governments is tremendous. Because you have people migrating from the rural to the urban, not just in the United States. This is happening all over the world. Whether it's manufacturing or economic opportunity, just jobs. And they're going in and taking less of a job, salary reduction. So maybe they need some subsidies. It puts a strain on local governments to provide more support and assistance in housing, healthcare, food to a lot of these migrating populations. It's a real challenge worldwide that I think is studied and investigated pretty thoroughly, but I'm not sure that we have control.
Well, it's control and finding a solution that is just and that is fair.
Yes.
These are people, some of them are people who are going to a new country with the hope of improving their standards of living.
Yes.
They may have sick children.
Yes.
I mean, there are many, many reasons why in some cases it may be justified. If you look at this from the point of view of those people, and we sort of tried to do that earlier in the show, is why are they coming here? They want to have a better life. They want to have a safer place to live, where their children are not killed in the streets, they're not kidnapped, and unfortunately that is happening in the case of the U.S. in many of the Latin American countries. So that explains why people want to migrate.
Well,
but there is another side to this story, to this discussion, and this is something that has been concerning me for a long time: is what happens to the country that loses these migrants.
Good point. I'm glad you brought that up.
And you have, and even before this migrations have been taking place in some part of the world in a large scale,
Mm-hmm.
there have been talks and discussions and a lot of documents and articles and academic work on brain drain. If you look at countries like Venezuela, Ecuador,
Nicaragua,
Colombia, Nicaragua,
Cuba.
Bolivia, Argentina, and Cuba, of course, Mexico,
Mm-hmm.
Guatemala. So, I mean, if I keep going, that's probably 75% of Latin America.
Yeah.
Though, a lot of those people are, and especially young people,
Mm-hmm.
are people who are coming to the U.S., for example, or
Mm-hmm.
going to Europe. But
Mm-hmm.
let's talk about the U.S.,
Okay.
which is where most of the people, I think, are coming
Mm-hmm.
to study. They have relatives, maybe, and they get green cards, or I mean, they get permits to go to school and so on.
Mm-hmm.
They graduate and they find a way to stay here and
Mm-hmm.
get a job and they stay. And of course, improve their, in many cases, improve their living standards.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's going to be very difficult for them to go back, even if there's a challenge for them to help to reconstruct their countries,
Mm-hmm.
because they say, I mean, if past generations allowed for this destruction to happen, institutional destruction,
Yes.
and so on, the democracy,
Mm-hmm.
why should I risk going back if this can happen again? I perceive that a lot of these young people, especially, will be very, how to say, reticent
Uh-huh.
to go back
Yes.
and would rather stay here. Plus, keep in mind that most likely their children were born already here in the
Mm-hmm.
U.S. and are already citizens.
So the effect on their home countries.
Mm-hmm. So
this is the brain drain that you talk about.
The new generations are forming abroad and not in their country.
Wow.
And
Okay.
it's going to be, I think it's going to be very difficult to think that these large numbers of young people
Mm-hmm.
who are well trained, well educated,
Mm-hmm.
are going to be the force to
Mm-hmm.
drive the reconstruction of their countries.
Mm-hmm.
I am afraid that may not be the case.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the older people that have, and remember, when they grow up, let's say a kid arrives here when he's 12,
Mm-hmm.
11 or 12, and he goes to school here, high school, he graduates, he loses a lot of his contacts and his links to his original culture.
Sure.
So you also have a cultural transformation
Mm-hmm.
that would make it difficult for them to maybe adapt when they go back, and I think that might happen.
Yes.
So we have this impact. We always look at the impact on the receiving country
Yes.
of immigrants,
Mm-hmm.
but you also have to look at what happens to the families.
Yes.
There's so many broken families that have people here or in other countries that left and that's now separated.
Well, this is it certainly is very important and has to be looked at, because we have both seen the effects very specifically on Venezuela, with close to 1 million or more that have migrated.
I don't know how many,
out.
but it's a large number.
It's a large number. Do you see them going back? Going back to what? When will they go back?
I'll give you a good example that it's happening, and you mentioned Venezuela, that it's happening today in Venezuela. In the 50s, well, during the war, just before the war, the Second World War, and during the war, and up to maybe the 50s and early 60s, there was a lot of migration from Spain, Portugal,
Italy,
Germany, going to and some places from Eastern Europe, going to Latin America. Okay, and they spread out in just about every country. Some prefer one over the other.
Yes.
But I mean, there was massive migration who went to Latin America. Because of the conditions now, for example, in Venezuela, some of them went back to Europe, to their mother country.
Yes.
And for example, in Venezuela, we have a lot of Italians who, because of what is happening in Venezuela, went back to Italy. But they had already spent 30 years in Venezuela, 40, 50 years, and even more. So the new culture, the local culture, was so ingrained in their minds and in their behavior that they went back to their home country and they couldn't live there. They couldn't get used to living, let's say, in Italy.
Yes.
And after 1 or 2 years, they said, "No, I'm going back," and they went back to Venezuela. So it's like an anchor that forms on your host country, that you get so involved with it that then it's very difficult to adapt when you go back to your country of origin. So this is it's happening, and I wonder, for example, with the Cuban kids. That's the first generation.
Yeah.
The Cubans that are born here, or even the second generation, more so in the second generation. If there is a change in government in Cuba, that they will go back.
No,
they will go to Cuba.
I don't think so.
So,
well, if they did, they would change the face of that population.
Yeah, but the issue is, will they? I don't know.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying, that they could be the ones who motor the reconstruction of Cuba, but they're now so Americans.
Yes.
In the positive sense, I'm not saying, I don't see why you should say in the other sense.
Yeah.
But that I don't know if they want to go back.
Right.
And the country needs them. Venezuela needs a lot of the young people who came here and staying here. So
no question.
People only look at the impact on the host country.
Is it fair to say we have come to a point where we are a world of immigrants in a constant flow of migration? And we need to, even though countries need to take control of their immigration, they need to know who is in their country and what the support system is. But we need to be a world more recognized of immigrants, because we are a world of fluid migration. In these times, the world has become so much smaller as far as population movement, not just from the country to the city.
And then because of the internet, cross-culturalization, it's a lot easier. Because you can have people. I could be here now talking to some person in Thailand, or which I actually do every night. But I could be talking to people in Mozambique,
anywhere,
in South Africa, anywhere. I think that's beneficial. The more that we know each other, and I'm not saying the more you know the enemy, I'm saying the more you know each other, the better.
Maybe it'll reduce the enemy.
I think it will. I think, but it's a collective change, and we talked about, I think, in the last show, where people have to change, not only individually, right, but as a society, collectively. There has to be a change, and I think there will. I'm very optimistic that there will be
migration,
even or in spite of the differences in religion and in culture that we may have.
Good. Migration is a great topic.
It is,
and I'm glad we chose this perspective to look at immigration. Maybe immigration is a show for the future. There's certainly a lot to talk about.
And for me, as an immigrant into the U.S., I think it was a great conversation.
Yeah. Great topic. Thanks for your input. And folks, thanks for tuning in today. We'll be right back after a short break. Welcome back, everybody. Javier, I want to pick up on something we've done in the past in other segments. We've talked about warning labels on products and signs around the country. Here today, I want to talk about headlines that are in the news that we pick up and report it. I think proofreading might be a lost art in that business. But this could be important stuff.
Or is it?
Well, let's decide. Let's talk about a few of these.
Go ahead.
Here's a good one coming up here. A lot of times we see walkouts on jobs and factories and governments and school officials. And here's an observation by a newspaper reporting on a walkout. If the strike isn't settled quickly, it may last a while. That's philosophical.
You know, I don't know the name of the person who said this, or of the journalist who wrote it. It seems to me he may be related to the expert on the airplane accident, on the jet crash.
He might be the same guy.
Or maybe they went to the same school, because, I mean, they have a way of thinking and looking at facts, that it's amazing, because he really is convinced that if the strike doesn't settle quickly, it may continue.
Yeah, it may last a while.
That's logical.
That's a logical statement.
It is.
Right.
Why would we have to criticize what he said? He said something that has been statistically and scientifically proven, that if something lasts longer, it takes more time, right?
Yes.
I don't think nobody can negate this affirmation. I mean, this is a fact.
It's an important headline, that if it's not settled quickly, it may last a while.
Could that be like a warning to the people?
I think so.
If you continue striking,
yeah, I think you're onto something.
Yeah,
it's a warning.
It's a warning. So I think that might be important.
Yeah, it's like the old philosophical adage: no matter where you go in life, that's where you'll be.
Yeah, exactly.
It's logical.
Now, you're very technical. I know you're a very technical person.
Yes.
Okay, and
very philosophical.
Well, this is more technology than philosophy, I guess. But this was in the news, and it really surprises me, because I drive a lot. So do you. Okay, look what it says. It says red tape holds up new bridges.
Wow.
Would you drive over one?
Wow. I wonder, can we see there? I know we have in the U.S. a lot of infrastructure maintenance that needs to be done. Do you think they're using duct tape? Duct tape is a man's world.
But it's not red. I mean, I think you have a better solution. If what they're using is red tape,
you can see it.
Like painter's tape.
Yes.
It doesn't hold up like the duct tape.
So
maybe
we should send an email.
Right.
I think back to we don't have the listing on the city that this was posted.
Well, we can find out. We can do a Google search.
Yeah.
Now, do you think that that's possible, that somebody's really trying to fix up a bridge, infrastructure with red tape, or could that be? Maybe it has another interpretation.
It wouldn't surprise me that this is the solution that they came to solve a problem. If their budget is out, then they say, well, we have no funding to do this, so go on and do your best to get it repaired. Get the bridge maintained and repaired, do your best, but we have no funding for this.
All we have is tape.
All we have, well, use what you think will work. We have many...
but who would make that decision to use tape?
Maybe a city council.
Okay, a bureaucracy.
Yeah.
What are bureaucracies known for?
Red tape.
Aha!
Layers of red tape.
Layers of red. That's what's holding up the bridge, or whatever it says in the. Holds up the bridge. So maybe, I don't know. Maybe that's what the guy's saying.
So it's
the bureaucracy is holding up building the bridge or fixing the bridge.
Okay. You always seem to focus on these. You figure. This is important stuff.
It is important, It has two messages, actually. One message is that maybe you can fix a bridge with red tape. And the other message is, for the bureaucracy, don't hold down important construction. Yeah.
Well, I know this. We have a lot of bridges here in Florida. If I see red tape on the side of a bridge, I'm passing it. I'm not driving over.
Don't do it.
No, I don't think
even if you're walking, don't do it.
No, I'm not.
You'll never know. You'll never know. You'll never know.
Well, Javier, we've come to the end of the show.
We certainly had a good time, and we hope our listeners did too.
Maybe along the way, someone even learned something.
And remember, if you think something is
important stuff,
let us know, and we will talk about it.
So, until next time, hasta la vista.